This video contains flashing lights that may affect viewers with photosensitive epilepsy. Viewer discretion is advised. Super Smash Bros. Melee. It's one of the most popular fighting games today. Of course, it's best known for its competitive multiplayer, but the game also has a single-player mode with different minigames. The most famous one? Target Test, colloquially known as Break the Targets. It's pretty simple on its surface. You must break 10 targets through a course in the shortest time possible. Melee has 25 characters, and each one has their own Break the Targets level with 10 targets scattered around. The layout is usually tailored to the character's specific moves and abilities, sometimes resembling a level from that character's original game. Melee keeps track of your fastest time on each of the 25 levels, as well as your total time added up across all levels, known as your total high score. Players fell in love with Break the Targets when the game came out. Thousands of players spent hours on each level. They posted their fastest times online. Shortly after Melee's release in 2001, the world records on each of the 25 levels added up to about 4 minutes, and that number plummeted quickly. The community-wide total high score went down second by second, gradually getting closer to 3 minutes. By February 2008, the total high score was all the way down to 303.88. And then, things really slowed down. Over the next 10 years, 2009 through 2019, the total high score only went down by an average of 1/3 of a second per year. They went from lowering it 60 seconds in 6 years to just 3 seconds in a full decade. It was approaching a limit. These levels had become so optimized that they'd run out of time to save. After all, there were only so many options for going faster. As of 2019, the community-wide total high score stood at 3 minutes flat .87, just 1 second away from the sub-3 barrier. Yet at the current rate of improvement, it was unclear if they'd ever make it there. On February 15th, since records were so hard to come by, players in the Smash Stadium Discord talked about setting cash bounties to lower certain Break the Targets records. But then, SockDude threw another idea out there. What if they offered money for every frame of improvement, until the total high score came down under 3 minutes? SaveState was the first to contribute, offering $10 per frame for every frame up until sub-3. And from there, it started to snowball. SockDude and Moody, the number 1 and number 2 ranked players in Break the Targets, offered $10 and €10 per frame respectively. Before long, there was a total of $1,658.90 riding on this, or roughly $31 per frame. Multiple Reddit posts were made, building excitement for Melee players around the world to take on the challenge, the quest for sub-3. But for all the excitement around the bounty, there was also skepticism. These records had been optimized and nearly perfected over the last 18 years. To make it to sub-3, players would have to find a way to save 53 frames across 25 levels. It may not sound like much, but these were already 25 of the most optimized world records in all of video gaming. How do you save time when there might not even be time left to save?
Hey there, I don't believe we've met before. I'm Summoning Salt, and I'm here today because I have an exciting announcement. Introducing, for the very first time ever, the Summoning Salt VHS Collection.
Now look, I love physical media, and I love the nostalgia of VHS. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time. Every few months, I'm going to be re-releasing one of my videos on VHS. And the first entry in the Summoning Salt VHS collection, Halo 2. It comes with professionally designed, beautiful box art with a teal VHS tape inside. Of course, the tape itself is playable, featuring my 2023 upload, The History of Halo 2 World Records, edited to 4:3. I even updated the video, showing off what's happened to the world record since the original release. The only place to watch that is on this tape.
I want to do a whole bunch of these going forward, with all my classic videos getting a release. The better this first one does, the more I'll be able to do in the future.
To purchase it, go to summoningsalt.com. Hit view full details for the full description and pictures. It's available for $34.99 for the next 14 days only, then it's gone forever. Start your Summoning Salt VHS collection today. That's summoningsalt.com, only available for the next 14 days. It's February 15th, 2019, and these are the 25 world records in Break the Targets, along with the year they were set. As you can see, they were each just a few seconds long, and many had been standing for years. Some were set not long after the game came out, and remained unbroken more than a decade later. To start making progress on the bounty, someone would have to break one of these records. Who was most likely to do that? Well, there were 3 tiers of Break the Targets players. Tier 1 was the game's very best players. That's Sockdude and Moody. Including ties, Sockdude and Moody held a collective 18 of the 25 world records. They also had the 2 lowest individual total high scores, not far off from the community-wide total high score of 3.87. These 2 guys were the most likely to make progress on the bounty. The second tier included players who held 1 or 2 records but weren't on the same level as Sockdude and Moody. Players like Chaos 6, Sam the Digital, and Demon 9. Highly skilled players, but not quite as dominant. The bounty could be just what they need to chase more world records. And then, the third tier was the unknowns. Players who had never set a record, but with money on the line and the chance to be a part of something greater, they were going to do all they could to take even a single frame off of one world record. So you had the favorites, the underdogs, and the unknowns. Within days of the bounty's announcement, the community was buzzing, an activity level that hadn't been seen in years. Yet, for all the excitement, there was a lot of work ahead. Someone had to kick off the bounty by breaking a record, and all 25 of them had many, many years of history. But as optimized and as battle-tested as they were, maybe some of the oldest ones weren't quite optimal. And over 12 years, perhaps something had been missed. Let's take a look at Donkey Kong. This was the second oldest standing record in the game, a time of 8.41 performed by Zampa back in November 2007. Zampa was one of the original legends of Break the Targets. At one point in 2009, he held nearly half of all Break the Targets records by himself. Now, a decade later, only one of those records was still standing untied. Donkey Kong in 8.41 seconds. Why had this record stood unbeaten for the past 12 years? Well, this is everything that went into Zampa's time. Targets 1 and 2 are on either side of DK as he spawns in. It's blocked by the text, but Zampa starts by doing a pivot, where during the initial dash you press the opposite direction for only 1 frame to turn around in place. He then jabs, which breaks both of the first 2 targets. Targets 3 and 4 are then fairly straightforward as he just jumps up and breaks them. To reach the next targets, Zampa performs a series of wave lands, which is a variation of wave dashing. By doing an air dodge into the ground after jumping, you essentially cut off each jump early and instantly land, then become actionable again after just a few frames. This let Zampa do several jumps in rapid succession. Just after hitting target 5, he performs another move called an edge cancel. You usually have lag upon landing, but you can cancel that lag by entering the teetering animation that a character gets from being on the very edge of a platform. So, he lands as far to the left as possible to teeter, then buffers a dash right to keep moving as quickly as possible. The next 3 targets are straightforward. He breaks targets 6 and 7 in the air, then he does a neutral aerial to break target 8. Finally, Zampa does another edge cancel after target 9, then does a fast fall by pressing down while falling, and then hits target 10 with another neutral aerial. Stage complete. All the inputs I just described were performed by Zampa in 8.41 seconds. In real time, it looks like this. all had to be done as fast as possible, not wasting frames anywhere, and that's exactly what Zampa had done back in 2007. Now, in 2019, it was still the world record. That being said, it wasn't perfect. There was one more known optimization players could go for. After breaking the 7th target, you could do one more waveland on the girder below to potentially save a few frames. But even with this improvement, it would still be incredibly hard to beat Zampa. His movement was essentially perfect. From the pivot at the start, all the wavelands and edge cancels, beating him would be tough. But at least there was a path to doing so, unlike many of the other records. So, who would be the first to try and capitalize on this DK time save? Sockdude, or Moody, or perhaps an underdog like Chaos 6? Nope. It was Jerry3333. Now, Jerry wasn't really an unknown player. He'd set a few records in the past, but he didn't hold any records when the bounty was posted. Yet, he recognized an opportunity on DK, and a couple weeks into the bounty, he started playing it heavily. After 10 hours of playing, he plateaued at 8.48, just a few frames off the record. To improve the rest of the way, Jerry would have to be perfect. All the moves had to be done as fast as possible. He continued over the next few weeks, struggling and posting his progress in Discord. And finally, on March 19th, Jerry3333 did this. Jerry saved exactly 1 frame over Zampa. It was just enough to claim the first reward of the bounty, $31 to Jerry. It took an entire month to get there, but finally there was progress, and Zampa's ancient world record was obsolete. Now, here's the crazy part. Although Zampa's record stood for 12 years, Jerry's new record only stood for a single day. On March 20th, it was Sockdude getting another 1 frame improvement, 8.38. Sockdude used the exact same strategy as Jerry, but executed it just slightly faster. Of course, Sockdude held so many Break the Targets records, and had been doing this sort of thing for years. It wasn't surprising that he was able to pull through with a faster time. So, after a little over a month of the bounty, the first 2 frames had been collected, 51 frames to go. Where to look next? Well, some of these older records seem to have a bit of potential, so let's try another old one. Bowser. This record was also set back in 2007, just 4 days after the long-lasting Donkey Kong record. It was a time of 8.20 seconds by a player named Marth1. We need to talk about Marth1. He is the closest thing Break the Targets has to Matt Turk. From 2004 to 2013, he set world records on 22 of the game's 25 levels. He had insane versatility, jumping from character to character with no loss of skill. Many of his times stood for years, even over a decade, and players had no idea how to beat them. Despite mostly being done by 2007, his total high score still ranked 3rd in the world in 2019. In that huge length of time, only Sockdude and Moody had been able to pass him. Of all Marth1's world records, perhaps his finest was his Bowser record of 8.20, still standing more than 11 years after it was set. And a big reason why is because of a concept not found in most other levels: RNG. To break the first target at the start, you jump up and hit it with a flame. Each flame Bowser shoots randomly comes out at one of 65,536 angles, located between 35 and 55 degrees. Because of Bowser's positioning when you jump, you need to randomly get a flame that's high enough, or else all the flames will go underneath the target. To increase your chances, you can jump further to the right, making it more likely a flame will contact the target. But the more you move to the right, the more time you lose, as ultimately you want to move left for the next targets. In Marth1's 8.20, he barely moved right at all, meaning he had to do a lot of restarting. Beyond that, you also need good flame RNG to break the 3rd target, and then you have to deal with the flipper. Hard enough, it's essentially random. you need it to knock you up to the left, and that's determined by extremely precise positioning with the control stick. You must hold specific directions on consecutive frames. It's known as smash directional influence. So, that's effectively 3 pieces of RNG in the first 3 targets. This was a daunting record to try and beat. But in early April, Chaos 6 started playing Bowser. Chaos was a 15-year veteran of Melee, but he'd beaten a world record only once before, Roy back in 2013. Chaos played for hours every day trying for the Bowser record, and took his time down to 8.25. Other players joined in, including Jerry3333 and Sockdude. But on April 10th, Chaos beat them all to it. It took 12 years to beat Marth 1 by 1 frame, but it was good enough for the bounty. He had a tiny lead after the RNG gauntlet at the start, then preserved that lead all the way to the end. $31 to Chaos 6 for a 1-frame improvement. 50 frames to go. This was very slow progress. The bounty had been active for 2 months, and there had been 3 frames of improvement. Different players had chipped in here and there, yet it hadn't led to anything huge. The remaining 50 frames were going to take years at this rate. But that was about to change. As it turned out, Chaos's record on Bowser kicked off a flurry of activity, and in the span of just 1 week in April 2019, 4 new records were set for the bounty. The first was the Bowser record that you just saw. The next 2 both came on the same day by the same player, a legend by the name of Sam the Digital. Much like Chaos or Jerry, Sam the Digital wasn't considered one of the very best Break the Targets players, but he had a few characters he specialized in, ones where he had set world records in the past. 2 of those characters were Roy and Luigi, and on April 11th, he scored 1-frame improvements on both of them. With Roy, the most important part is the leftward velocity you get from the flipper midway through. Like Bowser, you more or less need to flick the control stick and hope for the best. In 2 frames, you go from up and right to full left. Sam the Digital was 1 frame ahead by the time he boosted off the flipper, and he preserved that lead over the final 5 targets. New world record. Then there was Luigi. This is an interesting one since the level is so short. All 10 targets can be broken in just over 3 seconds. You press A on the first frame to break target 1, jump, then re-jump, and press B to fireball and break target 2. Fast fall, then fireball target 3. Slip off the GameCube, wait a few frames, then fast fall, double jump, then do a back aerial to break both targets 4 and 5 at once. Cancel rightward drift by briefly holding left, then time another fireball to break targets 6 and 7. Fast fall again, drift left, then down plus B on the first frame possible while standing far to the right to break targets 8 and 9. Finally, slide to the right and break target 10. In real time, you must do all of that in 3 seconds. Now, the only way for Sam the Digital to save time here was to do everything frame perfectly, every move and input on the first possible frame. And on the same day as his Roy record, Sam the Digital managed to save 1 more frame. Through 7 targets, he was even with the record, but Sam landed further left on the bottom, meaning he hit both targets 8 and 9 on the same frame. The previous record had to wait an extra frame for target 9 to move closer to him. That made it 2 frames across 2 fights, and $62 for Sam the Digital. Although he didn't care about the bounty itself too much, he was just excited to see the community so active. Through April and May, a few more frames were saved. On April 16th, a relative newcomer named Mega Cordification saved a frame on Young Link. This is a very unique level, as 7 out of 10 targets are broken by a boomerang. These boomerangs always travel at the same speed, so the only place you can gain or lose time is on the other 3 targets and your movement between boomerang throws. You throw a boomerang at the bottom, then at the top, after double jumping and grabbing a bomb, you must throw a second boomerang at the perfect angle. It has to bounce off this edge, then go behind Young Link and hit the enclosed target. The difficulty of the 4.87 world record came from this boomerang throw, combined with the movement from just before it. But on April 16th, Mega Quartification came through with a 1 frame improvement, thanks to throwing the second boomerang 1 frame sooner. Then in May, it was Sam the Digital who broke the Bowser record again, and this one was notable. It was the first world record for the bounty by more than 1 frame. He saved a whopping 2 frames on Bowser. The time save all came at the start, as he landed on the first platform 2 frames ahead of Chaos 6's record. He then broke the final 9 targets in the exact same amount of time. After a few months of the bounty, somewhat surprisingly, Sam the Digital was leading the charge, but it was still progressing at a snail's pace. These were all 1 to 2 frame improvements, with 45 frames to go. It would really be helpful if players could find a way to save a chunk of that time. Did any of these records have the potential for that kind of improvement? Well, ever since the inception of the bounty, there was one character that players had their eyes on, because even though his strategy was so difficult, there was believed to be room for some serious time save. This is Fox. First, an epilepsy warning, as this level has flashing lights. For many years, the record on Fox's stage was stuck at 6.68 seconds by Zampa, set all the way back in January 2008. It was a hard record to beat for one specific reason. Fox has an extremely technical level. There's a huge variety of moves used, and just executing the world record strategy is brutal. After breaking the first 3 targets, you have to climb a big wall as quickly as possible. That's done by doing a double jump, a wall jump, then an upward air dodge. It's very easy to lose frames here, especially on the air dodge. Then later, there's the wall jump before the 7th target, where you barely have enough time to build up the necessary speed. Zampa's record did a great job with all this, which is why it stood for 11 years. But just before the bounty in 2019, a group of players made a push to beat it. They found a new strategy for the tough wall jump, and after a few new records, the time was down to 6.52 by Sockdude. Now, that seems like it may have pushed it out of contention for the bounty, a very recent record set by the game's best player. But if there was one person who had what it took to beat Sockdude, it was Moody. Moody had been doing this for a long time. He was setting world records as far back as 2006, first specializing in Kirby before moving on to other characters. Now 13 years later, the only player ahead of him was Sockdude. Moody thought he could get a little bit more out of the Fox record. The key was going to be how fast he could scale the wall at the start, and how effectively he could do the later wall jump. On July 20th, 2019, Moody did this. This was a 3-frame improvement to the world record, the biggest claim to the bounty so far. But he was actually a frame behind the world record after the climb. He made up a ton of time with his movement around the wall jump. So there was still room to go lower. And a few days later, he got one final improvement, 6.40, another 4 frames off the record. That made it a total of 7 frames shaved off in just 5 days from Moody. This is what happens when an elite player gets his hands on an unoptimized record. The 1-frame improvements from lower runners were great, but Moody had nearly matched their combined efforts on just one level. These big chunks were exactly what the community needed. Finding more like this was going to be crucial. Which of these other 24 levels would be a good candidate? As it turned out, Samus had some untapped potential too. Much like Fox, it was considered a difficult strategy, with an enormous amount of moves in rapid succession. But the existing record was slightly unoptimized, and it followed the exact same script as Fox. A top player swooped in, this time Sockdude, and saved 3 frames through faster execution. Another nice save for the bounty. We're seeing a pattern. The underdogs and unknowns had chipped in here and there with 1 to 2 frame improvements. But Sockdude and Moody were taking it a step further. They were the 2 best players, and once they set their targets on an unoptimized record, it was game over. 3, 4 frames, even potentially more. With Sockdude and Moody on the case, perhaps this bounty wouldn't last much longer. But after all the activity of the summer, heading into the fall, things slowed down again. During the end of August and all through September, no claims were made on the bounty. The problem was that the obvious time saves had already been identified and made. Sockdude and Moody could play all they wanted, but if they couldn't find a place to go faster, it didn't matter. After 6 months of playing from the community, they were still 35 frames short. By October, it had been a month and a half since the last improvement. To try and get things going, there was one more option: a break the glass in case of emergency time save. A strategy considered too difficult for humans. But if they wanted any chance at sub 3, it had to happen now. This is Jigglypuff. First, another epilepsy warning for flashing lights in this level. The world record here was 7.62 from 2015. It was set by Sockdude, so you know it was a good record. Here's how Jigglypuff's level works. You're essentially making your way through a snaking corridor, breaking targets along the path. After the first turn back, there are moving blocks that try to impede your progress. You must navigate around them. While the fastest movement through the level is intricate, the record strategy itself was pretty simple. Sockdude broke the targets on either side of him at the start, broke 2 more targets in front of him, then broke targets 5 and 6 while dodging blocks, and finally slipped under a moving block to make it back left, where he destroyed the final 4 targets in the air. It's just a simple S pattern, and yet, this basic level had one of the biggest untapped time saves in the entire game. There was a glitch here that could save 11 frames. At the end of the second corridor, if you slide off the edge of the final platform just as a moving block is coming, you'll get squished between the 2 blocks. Once these blocks overlap each other, Jigglypuff gets pushed through to the corridor below. It's unclear exactly who discovered this clip. We have footage of it from as far back as 2005, and it is a big time save over going around. 11 frames would be huge for the sub 3 push. So why hadn't anybody done it yet? Well, to do the clip, you have to arrive early enough to slide off the edge before the moving block comes. And in the world record, the fastest known execution by the fastest player, Sockdude arrived at the block 5 frames too slow to do the clip. If anybody could manage to get there in time, they'd be able to give the bounty its biggest award yet. And that's exactly what Moody wanted to do. He had to find a way to be 5 frames faster than Sockdude, obviously not an easy task. To his surprise, he had several attempts that actually got the floor clip. Problem was, on each attempt, he'd missed at least 1 target on the way. When you break a target, you freeze for a few frames, so had he not missed targets, Moody wouldn't have made it in time. He did these attempts off and on for months, but he always either missed multiple targets or missed the clip. He just wasn't fast enough. Moody had to save time earlier. So, he looked at the first 2 targets and decided to do a modified version of the task strat. Instead of using a neutral aerial, he used a down aerial to destroy the targets, which freezes the character for fewer frames. The downside is that it puts you in a harder position to break target 3, so preserving the frames that you saved can be difficult. With newfound motivation, Moody poured in the attempts, and a couple days later, Moody did this. A 12-frame improvement to the world record. This was the biggest improvement to any break the target record in more than 6 years. Other players were amazed that he pulled this off, but Moody still wasn't done. The next day, a player named Bobby posted a suggestion to Moody. He could do a reverse forward aerial during the floor clip to break target 7 faster, potentially saving a few more frames. Over the next week, he did more attempts trying to save those frames, and on October 13th, he came through with yet another world record. 5 more frames, for a total of 17 frames saved on Jigglypuff. Moody earned over $530 and took out nearly half the remaining bounty frames all at once. He was now leading the way to sub 3. With under 1/3 of a second to go, there were a few options where players could go from here. They could keep looking for more big improvements like Jigglypuff, hoping to take big chunks off at a time. But another easier option was to simply clean up more recent records. The Samus world record, set just a couple months ago by Sockdude, was a good example of this. It was a new record, but since Samus was such a hard level, Sockdude felt there was room to optimize it further. That being said, he didn't have any plans to do so, and Moody wasn't playing Samus either. So, somebody else would have to step up. It's time to talk about somebody new. Although, in a sense, he wasn't really new at all. This is Mario 64 Master. Mario 64 Master was one of Break the Target's early champions, and I'm talking really early champions. Back in 2003, just a couple years after the game came out, he was one of the best Break the Targets players in the world, and a level that he specialized in was Samus. In October 2004, he set a world record of 8.18, a time that stood for roughly the next 10 months, but he gradually played the game less and less, and by 2006, Mario 64 Master's interest in the game had faded as he went off to college, got a job, and generally just got on with his life. It happens all the time. A world-class player simply moves on as their interests change. It's practically inevitable at some point. But what wasn't usual was what happened next. After barely thinking about Melee for the next 13 years, in 2019, Mario 64 Master somehow got a small kindling of interest in the game. He saw there was a bounty going on for Sub 3 and rejoined the community of players. Despite years of inactivity, could he keep up with the likes of Sockdude and Moody? His world records from 2004 were impressive, but they were surely far less optimized than what today's players were doing. Well, he got to work playing Samus, his best record from 15 years ago. Mario 64 Master learned the new tech and practiced to get his skills where they used to be. He brought a new level of discipline and focus that the game had honestly never seen before. He created spreadsheets that broke down every strategy in intricate detail, writing up exactly where they lost and gained time down to the frame. Anybody who had the fastest split of breaking a certain target, he methodically studied how they did it, trying to implement it in his own attempts. It was like a science experiment. Mario 64 Master put over 100 hours of attempts into Samus over a few months, and 15 years after his last record, in October 2019, he set a new world record of 7.77, beating Sockdude by 3 frames. Then for good measure, a month later, he beat it by another frame. It's one of the best stories in the history of Break the Targets. How do legends from years past stack up against modern tech? Well, in the case of Mario 64 Master, he hadn't missed a beat. He's still setting records to this day. Players had now saved a total of 39 frames. They had 14 to go for Sub 3. And I'll say right now, the next improvement for the bounty was a 4-frame time save on Peach. This is notable because Peach has the most storied world record of all 25 levels. So much so that it was detailed in a video by Practical TAS. And to fully understand the significance of this record, we need a mini history lesson. For years, Peach's level had a straightforward strategy. Use an aerial attack for the first target, throw a turnip for the second target, and a parasol attack for targets 3 and 4. Then you take the top path to break targets 5, 6, and 7 before throwing a turnip and breaking the final 3 targets. Players took turns optimizing this strategy in the game's early era, finding tiny ways to save time and improve their movement. It ultimately settled on a world record of 10.10 by Marth1, set in 2005, considered an extremely optimized record. But taking the record under 10 seconds was too tempting. In order to do that, players had to use a new strategy, and what they came up with was mind-boggling. See, whenever you down plus B to pull a turnip, there's a 1 in 128 chance that instead of pulling a turnip, you'll pull an item. Of these item pulls, half will be a Mr. Saturn, 1/3 will be a bomb, and 1/6 will be a beam sword. This beam sword can be extremely helpful to a Break the Targets run, because it can be thrown almost twice the distance of a turnip. So normally at the fork in the path, you have to go up top to break those targets since a turnip won't reach. But if you pull a beam sword, you can take the low path while breaking the top targets with the beam sword. It saves an entire half second. The downside is that the pure odds of pulling a beam sword is 1 in 768, and that's on top of the execution needed for a world record. Players knew this strategy existed as far back as 2003, and they started going for it to get a sub 10. The record timeline is a bit murky, with several unrecorded world records. But the first person to get a world record on video with the 1 in 768 beam sword route was Joe Bushman, getting a 9.78 in August 2005. To get this record, Joe had to break the first 4 targets, then pray he won with the 1 in 768 chance to pull a beam sword. If he didn't, he had to restart. He'd get stuck in this loop for hours. Joe's record was one of the game's finest, and nobody tried to beat it for years. Then in 2012, Link's Dark Arrows went after it, beginning one of the longest world record chases in Break the Target's history. He pulled dozens of beam swords over hundreds of hours of attempts, compiling them in a playlist called Beam Sword Theater. These were all runs where he either got the sword at the wrong time or simply messed up after pulling it. Lots of people saw these attempts and became invested in his quest for the record. Link's Dark Arrows finally came through on March 13th, 2013, beating an 8-year-old world record with a 9.72. The record was then traded back and forth a bit between him and Hanky Panky, a competitive player who mained Peach. These players pushed each other to improve, and the record ultimately settled on a 9.53 by Link's Dark Arrows in June 2013. This was truly an incredible time. It almost tied the task from target 4 through the end, and only lost a few frames at the start. And keep in mind, that was with the 1 in 768 chance of pulling a beam sword. This time was still standing when the bounty began 6 years later. It was not considered a likely candidate for improvement. But man, is there anything Sockdude can't do? Sockdude implemented a new time save. At the end, he threw a sword in the air, ensuring that it left Peach's hand before he landed. This saved a few frames over landing before throwing the sword, which the old record did. Now, Sockdude still had to grind for the 1 in 768 luck, get all the earlier execution, and get this hard new maneuver at the end. But of course, he was able to do it. On November 2nd, 2019, Sockdude got a new world record of 9.46, matching the old task time. It's unreal how these top-level players are able to pull time out of thin air. That was 4 more frames for the bounty. What seemed like a pipe dream, something that might take years to accomplish, was now almost a reality. Just 4 months ago, after weeks of slow, grueling progress, runners still had 50 frames to go until sub 3. Now, thanks to revelations on Fox, Samus, Jigglypuff, and Peach, that number was down to just 10. These players had a big decision to make. A lot of the recent improvements were from big strategy changes, allowing for several frames to be taken off at once, but those had really dried up, and now the big improvements would naturally be harder to come by. Another option would be to just try and shave small pieces of time off until the 10 frames were gone. Some records, like Captain Falcon, Link, and Kirby for instance, were known to not be fully optimized and could be lowered by a frame or two. So, what was the right way to proceed? Go for it all, or chip away on several levels? The responsible thing was to take the sure path, save a frame or two here and there until 10 frames had been taken off. But nah, go big or go home, baby. Pikachu's world record was about a decade old, set on New Year's Day 2010. It was performed by a player named Demon9. You might know him today as one of the most prolific Zelda speedrunners of all time, breaking world records in Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. But back in 2010, he was playing Melee, and the level that he was best at was Pikachu. On January 1st, he set a time of 7.20, a world record so good that it was still standing 10 years later. It had survived the likes of Sockdude, Moody, and everyone else. The record used the same strategy that had been used since just a bit after the game came out. It was pretty tough. There was awkward movement at the start, then after the first 5 targets you had to waveland, dash right, full jump, then up air to target 6 and 7. A lot of moves in rapid succession. On top of that, it was an optimized record. Demon9 left room for maybe a couple frames of improvement, but not much. So then why are we talking about this record? Well, because in 2019, Demon9 came back to Pikachu, and he found something big. See, for years there was known to be a faster method to break targets 6 and 7. Instead of jumping up and landing on the moving platform, you do an up plus B, a move that's broken into 2 legs. You move horizontally to the right on the first leg, and then perfectly angle your control stick to move up and right on the second leg, allowing you to edge cancel on the moving platform above. The problem was the angle for the second leg. It had to be so perfect that it was practically impossible. These dots represent all possible angles you can hold the control stick. In order to get the edge cancel on the moving platform, you have this specific tiny window where you must hold the control stick. You'll notice it's not all the way on the rim. It's a tiny bit before the edge, making the exact position even harder. There was no way to hit this with any consistency. But in late 2019, Demon 9 came up with a brilliant idea. Instead of going horizontal on the first leg and then diagonal, what if you switched the order, going diagonal first and then horizontal? This made things easier. The first leg, you could just pick a rim angle to get the right height. The second leg, instead of having a tiny range, you could now pick any x-axis range in the y-axis dead zone of the controller. It also makes the edge cancel itself easier since you have more horizontal speed, which is directly tied to how long you have to edge cancel. It really was a huge discovery, and when Demon got a time of 7.35 using the route, even though it was too slow for a record, it was a proof of concept that this was going to work. And not only was it faster, but it could potentially be enough to end the bounty on its own. This was the path to take the total high score under 3 minutes. And although there had already been a burst of activity for the bounty, there was about to be an even bigger one, as we were going to find out who would get the glory of finishing off the sub 3. Moody and Sockdude were the obvious candidates here. Mario 64 Master and Sam the Digital had a chance. But also now, there was Demon 9. He'd found the new strat, and he was the record holder. Maybe he could pull it off first. The current record was 7.20. We need 7.03 for sub 3. Over the following days, there was a huge rush to try and get it. Many players threw attempts at it, hoping to be the one to break the sub 3 barrier. Just a 1-frame improvement, yes. It bled time all over compared to the previous record, but the new strategy saved so much time that he made up for it. It came exactly 10 years to the day after his previous record. This new time was set on New Year's Day 2020. As usual, the congratulations poured in, this time with a big sense of anticipation. The bounty wasn't done yet, but everyone could tell what was coming. 9 frames to go. The community-wide scramble continued, but the very next day, it was Demon 9 coming through again, this time with a 7.10. It was similar to the last record, but with a slightly faster start. It saved 5 more frames. 4 frames to go until sub 3. Demon had all the momentum, but either way, clearly something amazing was about to happen. The past 10 months were about to reach their conclusion. And later the same day as the 7.10, another world record was set.
Yes! Oh my god! What? What? Oh my god. Oh boy, wow. That's great. We got it, guys. That's it.
Moody was the most fitting player to finish off the bounty. He was one of the original sponsors of the bounty, and had claimed more bounty frames than everyone else put together. In total, not counting the money he spent, he'd earned almost $900, way ahead of the rest of the pack. Even Sockdude had to bow down to Moody. The bounty wouldn't have happened without him. But this was still a community-wide effort. They'd come together and taken the total high score down by a full second in under a year. The previous second had taken more than 4 years. These were some of the biggest world record cuts in ages. The community was popping off right now. There were so many eyes on each of the game's 25 world records. And what happened next? is even more shocking than the initial push for Sub 3. A few weeks later, Demon 9 came back and reclaimed the Pikachu record. The next day, Sam the Digital broke the longest standing Break the Targets record, Captain Falcon from 2006. A week later, Sockdude took another 2 frames off the Pikachu record. And then, Sam the Digital took a frame off the Link record and 2 frames off the Kirby record. In just a few weeks after the bounty's finish, another 8 frames had come off the total high score. The bounty had revitalized the community. The momentum was still going. That was nothing compared to what happened in late February 2020. It all centered around the Ice Climbers level. Jerry3333 and Moody found a way to reorder some moves and save a full quarter of a second. And then, the community worked together to utilize a task strategy called the Early Cloud. The key was to break the first target with a neutral B, allowing you to reach this cloud on the left instead of one on the right, and make it up the level faster. How much faster? Well, thanks to the Early Cloud, over the next few weeks, Break the Targets players took 91 frames off the Ice Climbers world record. The entirety of the bounty was just 53 frames. Timing is a funny thing. Had the Early Cloud been discovered just a year earlier, there wouldn't have been a bounty. No big push for Sub 3. It would have instantly been over in one level. There may have been no revitalization of the community, no return of Mario 64 Master, and no record spree from Sockdude and Moody. Instead, Break the Targets was completely revived. By March 2020, the total high score was down to 257.93. That was now 3 seconds taken off in just a year. The previous 3 seconds took 9 years. Today, the total high score is all the way down to a 253. There are several new records set every year, oftentimes multiple in a month. And if the bounty never existed, there's no telling where we'd be. What's the point of this story? Well, in speedrunning, it's not really about the records. It's about the journey. And nowhere is that more evident than in Break the Targets. Thanks for watching.